Trigger warning. The following video contains unsanctioned opinions. It also features myself in a Make America Great Again cap, and at one stage I even rock out my Trump-endorsed Bible. It's actually quite a nice one. It's got an embossment at the top acknowledging the assassination attempt, the day God intervened, 13th of July 2024. I'm a proud owner. But beyond that, the rest of the video challenges regime narrative and pushes back against the Hollywood system along with
The Message.
So, Left Behind is a 2023 movie directed by and starring Kevin Sorbo. Now, this is a movie that's based on a book series, or at least an early part of the book series, and there are also other remakes and adaptations of that series. So, to be clear, I'll just read you the synopsis of this one. 6 months after millions of people disappeared in the rapture, the world is just beginning to recover. So, when a so-called expert claims that a second wave of vanishings is imminent, news anchor Cameron Buck sets out to disprove her theory. On a parallel journey, Ray tries to convince his daughter that his wife's disappearance was in fact the rapture. In a world where biblical truth is censored and vilified, he's desperate for answers. As their paths begin to converge, Buck soon realises that the story is much bigger than he could have imagined. They are indeed living in the end times prophesied in the Bible and facing the rise to power of the evilest and most dangerous human being in history, the Antichrist. So that's the synopsis. Obviously, fundamentally, this is a film with religious overtones, but there's more to it than that. And this film has been criticised quite heavily by a lot of people. I get offended by this kind of thing. So we're going to get into that a little bit as well. So I'll address the elephant in the room straight away. This hat. This is a Cali Fame hat from the current year, 2024. This is an official one that I got from the US. Wasn't easy to get hold of in the UK, and there's a reason I'm wearing this. This movie doesn't get into any of this stuff, but apparently it's this audience is the one that made this film what it is. So maybe to kind of counter some of the criticisms that it's gone, I'll get into that. I'm going to wear this just as a kind of screw you to you guys. Because I don't believe in alienating the audience. I think that if you don't like this, it's fine. You can still watch the video. You're still welcome to disagree. You're still welcome to comment and so on. That's how this works. That's why we're the good guys. That's how we know we're the good guys. Because we don't silence dissent. Kind of a hallmark of villainy. But the point I'm making, there's a reason why this is relevant to this review. I'm not just kind of throwing it out there just to have a dig. There's a channel that I follow, and or used to, and the guy talks about home video releases in terms of Blu-ray and 4Ks. Pretty good channel. The guy knows his stuff. But there was this one time in particular, beginning of last year, where he mentioned this film Left Behind. Now, this is a film that I hadn't heard of up till this point, and based on what he said, it actually made me want to watch the film. You could call it the Streisand effect. For context, what he said was that this film had been seeing very recent success on its release, and that it was unfortunate that it had monetary success in terms of sales, because it was a Christian movie, and he was basically saying that it was a MAGA audience. That was the phrase he used. Trump supporters don't call themselves MAGA. I think that's a phrase that sounds a bit clown-like by design, hence the guy used it. So instantly, it was just like, well, think what you want, but that's a bit of a cheap shot, and like, why would you be disappointed by it, where there's plenty of movies out there that get into like Christianity and so on that nobody has a problem with, like the Indiana Jones trilogy, the original trilogy, fundamentally were telling the audience that the Gospels, the Bible, is true, and that the Holy Grail is a real thing, that the Ark of the Covenant is a real thing, and people enjoy it. You have to be alienated, you have to be triggered by it. So that's the hate that this movie got. Now, the point I'm going to want to make in this review is to just say that there is something for audience other than the Trump supporters and other than the Christians. Yes, I'm both. In fact, I can even show you this artifact here, I even have a Trump Bible as well. This is the one that he endorsed. This is a reissue as well. The day God intervened, July 13th, 2024. Whoopi Goldberg was not happy with this one, but again, the Streisand effect made me want to own it even more and just have it as part of my collection. But like I said, there's something that isn't this or this in this movie that I think you could get on the same page with. So don't write it off just because of this and this. And that is, this film is really about COVID. This film is about the lockdowns and the response and the way the government handled it and the measures that were introduced and the mass formation psychosis that a lot of people in our friends, family, co-workers, social circles all engaged in. This movie really does hit the nail on the head with that. I would say that is the greater takeaway in this movie than the Christian angle. And this movie doesn't even get into Trump. Trump isn't even mentioned in this, I don't think. This film is kind of set in its own universe, its own timeline, not the one we live in. But it's kind of cleverly done. So, like I said, the guy talking about it on that YouTube channel kind of made me want to check it out. And before I watched it, I watched the original trilogy of movies. I think these were just straight to video movies, quite successful at the time when they came out. It was Kirk Cameron. He was the actor in the original ones, and Lewis Gossett Jr. was in the third one. They're not terrible, but most people probably wouldn't want to watch them. I kind of did it for research purposes, and they were okay. But then obviously there's this remake. There's also a 2014 remake with Nicolas Cage as well. I've not seen it, so I can't really comment, but that's something else that's part of this. And these movies are based on books, a series of books. So what I did was I rewatched this movie again this year, and I made some notes, and I'm going to get into what I noted as being relevant in terms of the COVID references, why it's quite clever in that way. Because in the movie, obviously, there's a vanishing event that happens. That is the rapture, and it's mentioned as being the vanishing. Now, in this movie, there's all sorts of things that are thrown out there. There's a presentation of something called, well, it's a vanishing vaccine, because you'd really be able to vaccinate people from this. It's ridiculous as a concept, but it's something that's thrown out there, obviously, as a reference to the COVID vaccine, and it's presented as something to the audience. We know it's not something that would in any way be effective, because that's not what the vanishings were about. That was the rapture. You can't vaccinate against that. But there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of power to be made, and dominance that you can get from forcing people to inject a vaccine into the body that they don't want to do. You can set a precedent there by forcing them to do it, and then continue that with other things as well. So that's a concept that is in this movie. The economic collapse that is kind of threatened off the back of the vanishings, used to bring in a one world currency and economy. That's a fundamental part of the story in this movie. Does that sound familiar? False events that have been staged as well. That's something that we see in this. The government has and it's depicted in the movie, it has a computer model predicting a second wave of vanishings. If you remember early on in during COVID, they were talking about a second wave, and that was kind of like a buzz phrase used to scare people into submission. That's presented here in terms of a second wave of vanishings. So people accept measures that they wouldn't otherwise accept, because it's something that the government uses to get around that. What I mean is, if the government wants the public to accept something that they're not going to accept, the government will then create a perception of a threat, a problem. There is then a reaction by the public to that problem. Oh my God, something's got to be done. What are they going to do about it? What do? They present the solution being that very thing that the people wouldn't have accepted in the first place had it not been for the threat and then you scaring the crap out of them. Problem, reaction, solution. So that's massively something that's presented in this film quite well. And then obviously there is the same people and big business interests in this movie that are depicted in this movie, the ones that are announcing the second wave. So it's made quite clear that there is a threat that's being imposed upon people, a fake threat, and it's very clearly depicted in this movie. The same people that are scamming people are the ones that are pushing these New World Order measures that you see in the movie. And I'll give some more examples about what those measures are. But it's made very clear that it's not just two separate things. So there is a threat, and then on the other side, there's a group of people that are like benefiting from it. It's very clear that the same people benefiting from it are people that are like creating the threat and the perception of it. So some of the other New World Order measures that I mentioned in this, there's a social credit score system very clearly depicted in this movie, carrying the mark of the beast as well. Obviously, that's going to be part of it because it's a Christian thing. There's a thing in this called Eden Pay, which is a new payment system, a new monetary system that is presented. Eden being one of these big tech companies, a bit like Meta. So they have this thing called Eden Pay. And again, they're quite clear in this move that if you don't download the app and if you don't comply with it, you will starve to death, basically, because that's the money system. So no man will be allowed to buy or trade lest he carry the mark, basically, if that sounds familiar to you. And does it also maybe, I mean, it sounds familiar because it's kind of referencing some biblical texts and so on. Whereas you could also say it sounds quite familiar because of the social credit course, the social credit score. He was in another video, social credit score system that is being rolled out across the globe in our world, in our reality. This isn't just science fiction. There's lots of stuff about the science in this as well. There's a lot of debates on there about we own the science. Does that sound familiar? We were seeing a lot of that in 2020 and so on. Locking people at home. That's something that happens in this. Again, does that sound familiar? Like I say, really do hit the nail on the head with this. Media censorship as well. Something that you see a lot in this film as well. The global government presenting a technocratic great reset off the back of the catastrophe. Like I say, that's whole order out of chaos scenario, problem, reaction, solution that I was mentioning before. What's quite interesting in this one is that you see people on the mainstream media talking about God's involvement in the vanishings, which we know that is what it is. It's the rapture. It's God's involvement in these vanishings, but the people aren't allowed to know that. So anyone that does kind of even suggest that, it's referred to as a conspiracy theory, because we all know that that's a loaded term used to discredit people that might be onto the truth, and often are. There is a concept of a pandemic of evil. Those are the words that are used, and we've seen that as well in real life terms that's been presented as well. People that survive the vanishings in this are engaging in a pandemic of evil. That's kind of language that's used. So again, kind of a on the nose reference to the pandemic that we experienced in our reality. Transfer of wealth and power following the vanishings. We certainly saw a transfer of wealth and power, a redistribution of wealth during COVID. All these small businesses that couldn't survive it, so the larger companies would have a monopoly. Companies like Amazon being one of many, but the ones that were closed and don't exist anymore are even more. There's even more of those. So that was another thing that's depicted in this. Investigative journalists being more like actors. You see that in this film as well, and we see that in the real world where we are when you turn on the TV. Supposed investigative journalists like we once had, and we still have them, but not quite as much as we did. Kind of replaced by just actors in this and people that are bought and paid for fake news and so on. That's something that's definitely a big part in this. Aliens and UFOs are an acceptable theory in this. So you're not allowed to suggest that God is behind this. But if you want to say that aliens and UFOs are behind these vanishings, that's fine. You're allowed to talk about that because it's a distraction. It's not true in this movie. Now, one thing that I did think that was quite interesting is kind of the last note that I made on this. In this movie, there are certain characters that will look on their smartphone or their computer at apps and websites to access parts of the Bible and information on the Bible. And they'll go on it and it won't come up with anything. There's nothing there because these apps have been removed due to a violation of service, a violation of terms of service. Certainly something that we saw with all of the censorship in 2020 and beyond. I mean, we saw a lot of it before that as well. But the kind of way that it's done doesn't really make sense. There's not really actually a violation of the terms of service. It's people having dissenting voices, I think, is a real crime. So all these little things, like I say, I mean, this film is more about COVID, I would say. It's presented from a religious point of view, and there is plenty of stuff in there. There is plenty of, you know, food for thought in terms of theological discussions and theories and debates and so on, and in terms of the rapture and how that would play out, that kind of stuff. But the movie really is a modern day post-COVID movie, and they hammer it home pretty hard. So I think it will annoy quite a lot of people that were bought and paid for, that were watching the news every day and just unquestioningly going along with it and kind of sliding into the whole mass formation psychosis. The people who are asking, are you vaccinated? Well, obviously, if you're not answering the question, you're obviously not, then are you? We've got one of them, you know. And there's a lot of that went on across the globe. So I think those are the kind of people who are going to be offended by this film, because I think it really does kind of get into that. But I'm doing this for the Halloween special because it was definitely a horror film in that sense, depending on how you look at it. To me, I would say it's definitely a horror film. You could disagree with that, but I think it fits in quite well. It's certainly scary anyway. Some will just say it's silly, and maybe it is. Maybe you're right, but point of this is, it's movies and entertainment is subjective. So I'm not one for shutting people down and silencing people unless they're being abusive and so on. But if you have a different opinion, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Sound off in the comment section as you see fit. I'm not anticipating getting a lot of views on this video, to be fair, anyway. So maybe the MAGA hat will draw people in. Seeing that, should I put that on the thumbnail? That might be something that winds people up. Here's a picture for the thumbnail. There you go. Right, anyway, on that note, we will be back tomorrow with something a little bit more typical for our Halloween special. And yeah, I will leave it there and say thank you very much for watching.